back again. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I've got some more tales of the strange and dangerous for you today. Now, everyone's got their favourite ghost ship story. There's a lot of liars out there who'll tell you they've seen one too. For the most part, ghost ships are just tall tales, my friend. But there are some stories that have a basis in reality. The galaxy's a strange place, and you're bound to find all manner of strange things in it if you search long enough. I've got 3 stories of ghost ships to share with you today, stories that have a basis in reality.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The first one's not about a ghost ship per se, but more about a collection of ghost ships and similar phenomena. It's called the Dreighton Triangle, and it's pretty well known. But there's so much BS about it floating around that it can get hard to separate fact from fiction, and there is some truth to the story. The Dreighton Nebula, as you may know, is out in wild space on the edges of the Duntus sector, pretty far from civilization. Like a lot of nebula, it's dense and a pain in the arse to navigate. Deep within it are a scattering of noteworthy systems which contain 3 planets of special significance. There's Dreighton, of course, a desert world that shares its name with the nebula. There's the swamp planet Imdar, somewhat close by, and then there's the crown jewel of the Dreighton Nebula, Aten II, one of the galaxy's only known sources of Stygium crystals, which is pretty much the only reason anyone tries to navigate the nebula. Stygium is one of the most valuable resources in the galaxy due to its use in cloaking devices. Now, there are a lot of ways to cloak a ship. The simplest is by just powering down all systems so that you look like a chunk of debris on most sensors. Some ships have dedicated signal jammers to maintain the same effect without powering down, but these methods still leave you vulnerable to the Mark I eyeball, so anyone serious about hiding their ship will get a genuine cloaking device, which renders the ship invisible to the naked eye as well as to sensors. Most cloaking devices are imperfect at best, using holograms or blending fields to hide ships from specific angles. But the best cloaking devices, the only ones that make ships properly invisible, use Stygium crystals. This makes Aten II a very important planet. Or it did, back before the planet's mines ran dry. But getting to Aten II requires going through the Dreighton Nebula, which is easier said than done, and not just because of the ordinary dangers of navigating nebulae. Aten II, Dreighton, and Imdar are said to make up the Dreighton Triangle, a patch of space where reality is off and strange things happen. Ships disappear passing through the region all the time, and sightings of ghost ships there are just as common. Some of these ghost ships have been known to fire on travelers, attempting to add them to the ranks of those lost in the Dreighton Triangle before disappearing suddenly. Of course, with Aten II in such close proximity, it's worth considering whether these are actual ghosts or just ordinary ships with cloaking devices. But even if it hasn't actually haunted, the Dreighton Nebula's a dangerous place. Speaking of danger, any spacer worth their spice will tell you that nothing's more dangerous than picking a fight with the Bureau of Ships and Services. And that's no exaggeration. There's a whole fleet of ghost ships out there to attest to that. If you paid attention in history class, you just might remember the Pius Dea. You know, the crazy, warmongering cult that ruled the Republic for 1,000 years? They subjected the whole galaxy to all sorts of horrors, from anti-alien bigotry and corrupt theocracy to vicious crusades and inquisitions. During their reign of terror, the most well-known symbols of the Pius Dea were the Cathedral Ships, the great black battleships their crusaders used to ravage the Rim. They were some of the most sinister ships you'd ever set eyes on, by all accounts, bristling with guns, jagged plating, and the spires of ad hoc cathedrals. They terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years before the Pius Dea were finally brought down. The defeat of the Pius Dea was a group effort. The Jedi masterminded the whole thing, and Kamas and Alsakan both played big roles as well. But one of the most important conspirators was the Bureau of Ships and Services, which seeded the Navi computers of the entire Pius Dea fleet with rogue coordinates. One day, every cathedral ship in the galaxy was forced into hyperspace, sent off to the middle of nowhere, following which the Bureau remotely disabled their hyperdrives. The Crusaders aboard died slow, lonely deaths out in the middle of nowhere, their warships crawling through real space towards stars they would never reach. With history that old, it can be hard to tell what's reality and what's myth, but this story is at least mostly true. And we know because smugglers on lesser-known routes run into cathedral ships now and again, drifting aimlessly through space. Their reactors went cold long ago, but in space, anything with momentum will travel forever unless actively stopped, so they continue on their journeys, hollow husks without purpose. Some of them still carry the remains of their former crews, who starved to death over 10,000 years ago. Maybe they still have loot from conquered worlds sitting in their cargo holds, but you couldn't pay me to board one of those things to get it, that's for sure. If you ask me, the cathedral ships are as real as ghosts get. They're monsters from a bygone age, dead but still haunting the stars, just waiting for some smuggler to find them. The only consolation is that they're long dead. A cathedral ship won't hurt you unless you slam into it. But some ghost ships are much more unquiet. This last ghost ship is another one from the history books, and thankfully, it was destroyed thousands of years ago. But based on what we know from the records of the old Sith Wars, in its time, it was the most terrifying ghost ship you could possibly encounter, and its name was the Ravager. The Ravager was originally a Republic Centurion-class battlecruiser made for the Mandalorian Wars. It was one of the largest warships of its time, a flagship of the Republic fleet. But it was felled by the Mandalorians in the last battle of the war, crippled by their last assault above Malachor 5. But the Ravager came back from the dead, and in the years after the Mandalorian Wars, it wandered the space lanes, hunting for prey. Eyewitness accounts from the Battle of Telos 4 suggest that the Ravager shouldn't have even been spaceworthy. It was covered in wounds inflicted by Mandalorian guns, vast tears in its hull that left the ship's interior open to space. The ship's components were unstable, and bolts of electricity occasionally shot between the gaps in the hull, looking like lightning welling up from the guts of the ship. The interior was in a similarly poor state. The Ravager's decks were all in extensive states of disrepair, their walls charred and rusted. Barracks, control rooms, and missile bays all lay empty, their computers non-functional and covered in a thick layer of dust. The ship's lighting, where it still worked, had faded to a sickly yellow-orange. Most of the ship was empty, but not all of it. Because the Ravager wasn't just a ghost ship, it had a whole ghost crew, a horde of half-living zombie slaves, their once human features shriveled, pale and lifeless, still wearing tattered old uniforms of the Sith Empire. They were under the complete control of the Master of the Ravager, a Dark Lord of the Sith who, the records claim, held the ship together through sheer force of will, preventing the crippled vessel from succumbing to the damage it had sustained, much as he did for the crew. The Jedi say that this was no ordinary Sith Lord, but a hole in the universe, more an entity than a man, a lord of hunger. And their records say his name was Nihilus. The Ravager roamed the fringes of the galaxy at his command, hunting Jedi. In that era, the Jedi were coming close to extinction, and this ship was the reason why. Wherever the Jedi gathered, the Ravager would follow, and its master would destroy them, along with all who dared shelter them. The Ravager left a string of dead planets in its wake, worlds entirely bereft of life, from sentient beings down to the microscopic level. Qatar, a colony world in the Mid-Rim, was one such destroyed planet. Telos 4 was almost another, but it was saved by the Jedi, who slew the Lord of Hunger and blew his ghost ship to smithereens. The Ravager is long gone. The Sith are too, or so the Jedi say. But they weren't the only ones capable of these sorts of horrific, impossible things, and there's no telling when the next Ravager will arise to spite the world of the living. Until then, though, I've got shipments to run. Stay safe out there, and watch out for ghost ships.